one really knows how the game is played, the art of the trade, how the sausage gets made. We just assume that it happens, but no one else is in the room where it happens.
So my name is Sam Kwon. I'm running on the colour purple this year. I'm in my third year of my arts degree and I am a member of NLS on campus.
Can you tell us why you're running for board without saying it's because you love the union?
Okay, I do love the union, but besides from that, I was someone who got involved with the union from literally my first semester of uni. I've loved every second of it. All of my friends at uni, most of my friends I've made through the university. I think it's such a good asset for students, and I really want more students to kind of have the experience I had. Not saying that mine was necessarily the only one or the best one, but I think making the union more accessible for students, putting it out there is a good way, and that's why I want to run.
Cool. Sam, would you have deregistered the Evangelical Union?
Oh my gosh, so topical. I think how the board approached it was with the interfaith roundtable was a very good approach. I think more consultation was needed. In saying that, I think my personal decision would have been based off the legal advice that was given on whether constitutionally it was sound or not.
So to clarify, are you saying that you support the board's decision, like as of this morning, that it is reasonable to have an exemption from the CNS regulations for religious faith?
Was that the advice given by the legal counsel?
I don't think they shared.
Yeah, they didn't make that public. That was just the decision that they made.
I see. Well, I would say personally, I don't think people should have to make that faith-based, what's it called, profession? Declaration of faith. But again, even if my personal beliefs were for one way, if legal advice told me the best decision for the board was another, then I think that would have impacted my decision.
Sam, do you think that the board should be able to discuss issues such as executive salaries in camera?
So as in put it out in the open or
As
put
in
it or
behind closed doors?
behind closed doors? I don't think so. I think if you're elected as a student representative, then the entire part of the job kind of needs to be transparent and accessible for students. So, and I don't think salary is too big of a matter. It's not important enough or controversial enough that it deems to be needed to be held in camera.
So we're talking about executive salaries.
Yes. So the president, vice president, honorary.
But no, we're talking about sort of the union employees.
Oh,
The
okay.
CEO and the key management personnel of the union.
Right. No, I stand by my statement. I think as a primarily student-run organisation for students, also as a union, it should be transparent for students.
Okay, so do you think that there should be anything discussed only behind closed doors?
Yes, so I think when things should be in camera would be when there are legal matters. I think when there are dealings maybe with outside bodies that haven't been fully negotiated or like set in stone, I think those should be held in camera just because they might impact the final decision. I also think when it's got to do with individual issues that board members might have with each other, that might be better solved through communicating through those two individuals instead of like broadcasting it out there. I think those three would be reasonable to be held in camera.
If you had to vote, and excluding yourself, who would you rank 1 to 3 on the ballot?
1 to 3. I think I would put Courtney Thompson, number 1. I think secondly I would put Grace Frankie, and thirdly I think I put Vanessa Song.
What are the reasons, roughly?
So all 3 candidates that I mentioned have a lot of CNX experience like I do, and I think they're people who really know about the union, where the pitfalls. I've also read some of their policies. I think in things like reforming CNS or looking into CNS, we would work well together.
So, will you be directing your preferences to those three candidates then?
I would have to say at this point, no. Preferences haven't even come up, just because this interview is quite early compared to last year. We haven't even really discussed preferences yet, so I would have to say no at this point.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't direct them to those candidates if you think they are the three best qualified for the job?
I think ideally yes, but also like you have to do what's politically smart for you. And also I'd have to discuss that with my caucus.
Who would you rank last of all the candidates?
I think I would have to say Don Bondare. I don't know him in person, but just from his label as like a liberal, I think our views would differentiate substantively.
Of the board directors who were elected last year, who has been the most effective, in your opinion?
I think it's very hard to say, just pinpoint who's been most effective, like one person. I think a lot of board directors have done a lot of good things. For example, Jack Whitney, I think he did a lot with the changing the bathrooms for queer students. I really liked Tiffany Alexander and Shannon Potter, how they recently held that exec feedback session about the 10 free events, and as a result that got they scrapped that at the USU, which I think was a really good, that's a current example. I also liked Liv's past year, no, never mind.
So you mentioned Jack, Tiffany and Shannon. If those three people were to run for president, who would you vote for?
Again, because this interview's held so early, I don't think I can say definitely. Like, who I'd vote for president hasn't really come up yet. I haven't thought about it. I've just been concentrating on campaigning and stuff like that. But if out of the three that you mentioned, I think most likely I'd pick Jack Whitney.
Of the policies that have been introduced by the board over the past year, which do you think was the best?
Well, Ed McMahon and his subsidised access is obviously a big one. Also, how they're going to change how party themes are decided. So they're going to have like an ad hoc working group from now on to make sure that party themes aren't problematic and such. And I think that's a really good way for the union to progress.
So just on a follow-up for that, so do you think that the current policy development that you mentioned for the party themes has been successful, given that there's just this week been a lot of online debate about a recent party theme held by the interfaculty pub crawl?
Yes. So from my understanding, the ad hoc ones have to do with the ones that the USU hold like themselves. So like the the dodgy sweater party or the 90s party. Actually, because you brought it up in regards to the recent problematic party themes, one of my policies is sensitivity training for exec members. I think that would be a good way to combat this kind of, I wouldn't say it was malicious necessarily, rather ignorance, and I think sensitivity training would be a good way to combat that.
So Sam, you mentioned that you're a member of NLS?
Yes.
Now, would you ever vote against the wishes of your faction?
I think if it came to... firstly, you join a faction because they align with your own personal beliefs. So I really believe in the 4 pillars of NLS, which are unionism, feminism, socialism, and democracy. So I think I couldn't really perceive of where I would differentiate substantively, where we couldn't talk about it in caucus. But I think if it came to that where I had to vote, then that would be the time where I would reconsider my position in NLS and might consider leaving.
Okay, so
you'd preference leaving over disagreeing with the...
Well, NLS by nature is a binding caucus, which means that whatever caucus decides, you then follow through with the wishes of the caucus. So I think the most logical step, if you disagree to that extent with the caucus, is to leave.
So you're willing to leave your caucus to vote against their position if it's important enough for you?
I think so. I think every person, I don't think anyone could honestly say that like a political, I don't know how to describe, like a political, not a party, but like a political background is so important to them that they would give up what they believe as well. Obviously, the whole point of a caucus is to talk it out within the caucus first, and I would pursue those avenues. But if at the end of the day, I wholeheartedly disagreed with what the caucus wanted, then I think that would be the time to reconsider leaving.
What would you do in a situation where there were confidential matters, confidential USU matters that you knew of, that you couldn't tell your faction, but that would affect your faction?
I don't think that's an issue. Caucus really respects the fact that some matters are confidential and some matters are held in camera. So, for example, Jack Whitney, who's currently on the board, is also a member of my faction, NLS, and he doesn't bring to the faction any points that are confidential. So there is no conflict of being in a faction and also my duties as a board director, if elected.
So if elected a board director and you maintain your membership within NLS, you'd be a board director in NLS, and assuming that the president of the SSC was also in NLS, you'd have two different people from two different organisations part of the same faction. The president of the SSC has a duty to the SRC, you have a duty to the USU. How would the faction reconcile the opposing duties, for instance, in staff negotiations?
Well, I think actions speak for itself. We've had NLS candidates on board for the past previous years. We've had NLS members as president and other executive positions in SRC, and there's never been a hugely substantively conflicting interest. It's normally worked out within the faction, and ultimately the university decides, so it doesn't really matter. No, it does matter.
If you're willing to leave your faction if it conflicts with your personal views, and you're going to keep your confidential knowledge as a board director and your duties as a board director apart from the faction, what is the utility of being in your faction?
Well, like I said previously, confidential matters are kept from the faction if they can't be disclosed already. But I would like to reiterate that this has to be something that would challenge my political beliefs to its very core for me to consider leaving NLS. The utility of the faction in itself is that it acts as another safety net. Caucus, at the end of the day, are a bunch of students who care about similar things like activism and equality on campus. It gives me a chance to justify my actions, because although I'm running for union board because I believe I can do a great job, I don't profess to know everything, and sometimes I could make mistakes. So faction caucus acts as another safety net.
Is that something that you wouldn't be able, that consultation and that sort of safety net you wouldn't be able to get from the average student, or forums with other students?
I definitely think I could. But the nature of a caucus is that we do have regular meetings, we have these set procedures, we have agenda points, we have minutes to follow up. With ordinary students, I think someone would have to be very involved, and it would be asking a lot of them to continuously do this, whilst with a caucus it's much easier, just practically.
Would you breach your fiduciary duties to the union if it was in the interests of students?
I'd just like to clarify. I think maybe if you're referencing something like the Tom Rowie case, I think that he did express his fiduciary duties by leaking that, because he had a fiduciary duty to the students.
So what a fiduciary duty is it's a legal obligation that you take on by becoming a director on a board of directors to act in the interests of the company, i.e. the USU, and that sometimes does come into conflict with students. So in the case of Tom Rowie, he did actually break a fiduciary duty.
I see.
And that's why they took him to the Supreme Court.
I think it's important to balance out when you're a board director, your duties to the union, but also to the students you represent. I think in the case of Tom Rowie, he might have broken that duty, but he fulfilled by leaking a much broader, or in my personal opinion, a much more important duty, which was to the students ultimately.
So to clarify, you would breach a fiduciary duty similar to the one Tom Rowie breached if it was in the interest of students?
I think it's hard to say at this point, just because I haven't been elected to board yet and I don't know the dynamics or the issues that might come up. So I'm quite hesitant to make like a blanket yes or no. That being said, I do stand by what I said. And what I said was I think student interests ultimately should be the most important thing for board directors.
So you wouldn't at this moment?
I think it depends on the specific circumstances and if I really...
If there was a circumstance where you felt it felt right to breach a fiduciary duty, it was in the interest of students, would you do so?
I think if I had pursued all the other possible avenues that were available to me, like consultation with other board members, talking to the exec, and things like that, and if after all of my efforts nothing had been realised, then yes, I would act ultimately in the interest of students.
Right, so now moving on to some of your more specific policies.
Yes.
The first one we'd like to talk about is your proposal for quotas for queer and ethnocultural students on the executive of societies. Now, the first question is, define ethnocultural.
I'd just like to clarify, I didn't mean that for exec.
So
AA for queer and ethnocultural was more for the USU.
as the elections. Alright, sure. In that case, we'll go again.
So the reason that came up, or I put that policy in, was because, as you would know, the queer programs coordinator and the women's programs coordinator were kind of amalgamated into 4 casuals that run the USU events. And although as we currently have it, we have 2 women identifying casuals and 2 who identify as queer and both ethnocultural, I think it's still important to have those AAs set in place, because as we know, those groups do face marginalisation.
So to clarify, your AA policy, so it doesn't apply to the student executive of clubs and societies?
No.
Are you saying it should apply to the election of union board candidates or to the staff of the union?
Ideally, I would like to see this implemented throughout the entire USU, which would mean I personally think it should apply to the elections coming up. But I understand that this is quite a controversial topic, and I think it needs more consultation with both autonomous collectives, and also there needs to be consensus among the board directors for it to happen. So I think when I wrote that policy down, I envisioned a broader, like an entire USU encompassing thing, not specifically just for board, although ideally, if it did apply for board as well, that would be good.
So just to clarify the scope of it, is the board and the USU's employees?
No, it would be for students. Students employed by the USU.
But not the executive of clubs and societies?
No, because they're not employed by the USU, they're not being paid. So it would apply to things like the pulp editors, the casuals that I mentioned, people who might work at Access, Essex.
And what if those AA policies meant that current students in those positions would lose their jobs?
I think would have to be strategic and not cut people's jobs, obviously. It would be more of a phasing in the policy. So once maybe these students graduate or they find other employment, then maybe the next time we hire, we could put these standards in practice.
So, back to the policy. So, define ethnocultural.
I understand that that's very topical. It's very hard to define. I definitely would not be in the business of policing anyone's identities. I think the clearest guideline we can get is from the Autonomous Collective Against Racism and their definition of the definitions they hold. But I wouldn't personally police anyone's identity when they applied.
What is the definition of the Autonomous Collective Against Racism?
So it's anyone who feels marginalised by white supremacy, anyone who identifies from an ethnocultural background, and anyone who identifies as Torres Strait or Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander.
So you'd use the ACAR's guidelines. Would that clash with the USU's definition of ethnocultural officer in the regulations?
I don't think so, because I think those definitions are quite similar actually. And when the USU held their diversity event, and there was problems with non-ethnocultural members attending, the event organisers determined or decided to use ACAR's, or took into consideration ACAR's definition of ethnocultural.
So to clarify, the definition would be an issue of self-identification for the people applying to the positions.
Ultimately, yes, it would be about self-identification.
Could that identification be challenged at all by anyone in the hiring process?
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, so essentially, there would be no challenging or like appeal of what someone self-identifies with under your policy.
That would have to be determined by the board if this policy did go through. I myself personally hold to the belief that you can't police anyone's identity. So if it was to be implemented in the way that I envision, it wouldn't. But again, that needs to be negotiated whilst it's being implemented.
And if we can just sort of zero in on a case study, I think recently or last year there was an issue in ACAR where a person who had Hungarian heritage self-identified as being marginalised by white supremacy. In your opinion, would that fall under the policy that you're proposing?
Well, personally, I would believe that Hungarians wouldn't be marginalised by white supremacy, but holding with the belief that you shouldn't police anyone's identity if they were able to coherently justify and validate their claim of why they feel marginalised in today's modern Australia, then I think they should be given a chance to be listened to.
Okay. Now, Sam, some of your policies seem to be quite similar to policies passed. So, for instance, the noodle market, Liv Ronan had that idea in 2014. More vegetarian options on campus, Atia had that idea last year. Now, what makes you confident that you'll succeed where others maybe haven't been so successful?
Well, I definitely wouldn't say that Atia and Liv haven't been successful. I haven't talked to them specifically about these policies, but so I don't know the reasons why these haven't been implemented yet. But I think having another board director on board who share the same, who want the same things would obviously mean that this policy comes one step closer to being realised.
So if you don't know the reasons that they haven't been realised yet, what makes you sure that that they're still possible? If you're not aware of the obstacles.
Well, as I said, one of the obstacles might be that not enough board members agree with Atia or Liv, and if I get elected, would add one more to the yes vote, if that makes sense. That might be an obstacle. Other obstacles, as I said, I'm not too certain about. And obviously, like any candidate or like any reasonable person, I can't guarantee 100% that this can happen. But me even holding these beliefs and having these policies down, I think is a positive step forward for them to be realised. Even if it means negotiating, even if it means it gets, reformed into like a slightly different idea, that would still be realised by the board.
Currently, if you're a student at Kwon campus and you wish to join a USU club or society, you must first purchase an access card, which costs $75. But being at Cumberland campus, you reap none of the outlet benefits of the card. Do you think that's fair?
I think for me personally, I would say I would do it personally, just because even without the food discounts and all that, joining clubs and societies through by having an access card has given me so much, has given me so many experiences, most of my friends, so I would say I would go through with it.
So you still think it's worth $75 to pay for membership to a few societies, regardless. Of
Well, if those societies become like the benchmark of your university life, and that's where most of your involvement comes from, then I'd say sure.
And how about in terms of equality, the fact that there's no discount applicable at Cumberland campus, at least at main campus you get the discount on various outlets and stuff like that as part of that $75, but it's not the same value for money at Cumberland campus. Would you do anything to change that situation?
I'm going to be honest, I hadn't thought about that. One of my policies was that a cumulative discount for access if you've gotten it year after year. So right now how it is you pay $75 if you're signing up the first time, and the next time you sign up you pay $65. I wanted to continue that, so it's like in your third year another $5 off for $60, then $55 maybe, to incentivize people to keep renewing. But I hadn't thought about the situation in other campuses, but definitely that would be something I'm interested in looking into.
So just quickly on that policy, you just explained that. Doesn't that disincentivize people to buy more membership years upfront?
No, I think it would. They're aimed at different types of people. I think for someone who definitely knows that they're going to be at uni for, say, if their degrees are 5 years, like a combined law degree, or they're going to be involved for that length of time, then they can get the upfront discounted price. But for someone who might have joined for 1 year, doesn't really know if this was for them, I think it really incentivizes them to keep continuing and try to get a better uni experience.
So do you think that's a fair trade-off for the sort of the downturn in revenue you'll get from membership fees as a result of implementing that policy?
Yes, hopefully more people signing on means that then that can even out, basically.
So what I meant was that like you'd end up losing, you'd make less revenue under that plan than you would.
Yes, sorry, what I meant was that what I envision, well anyway, is hopefully more people will continue buying access because of this scheme and renew it year after year. So hopefully that money lost by giving them the discount can be made up for more people continuing to have access.
So you'd think it'd actually lead to an increase in the number of people who are members because they chose to renew because the price...
Yes, definitely. I know a lot of people, friends, who decided not to renew access after their first year. I know people who decided not to renew after 2 years. Hopefully with these discounts, it would incentivize them that much more to renew it.
One of your policies is a supermarket staffed by students. Now, supermarkets have been promised before. Why do you think that it's achievable this time around?
Well, that's a quite similar question to the noodle market and the vegetarian option. And again, my answer would be the same. Just more board members wanting it might lead to it actually happening.
So it's not exactly what... Not that you're bringing anything new to the table, it's just that the board members might be different. Is that a policy?
Definitely, it hasn't happened yet. I'm proposing it. I think it's a policy. I think it's a fair policy.
Okay. Now, how does a new supermarket fit into the renegotiation of the USU's occupancy agreement with the university next year?
I'm going to be honest, I don't know too much about the renegotiations right now, but if elected, I'm sure I'll have my say and try to get an area for a supermarket.
Another one of your policies is for more taps and bubblers. How many bubblers does the USU currently operate?
I don't know for certain, but the ones on Eastern Ave and things like that, I think are operated by the university. The only one I can really think of is that water tap in Courtyard. But I'd like to see more, maybe like at least one more for each USU outlet.
Okay, so in that case, like, how do you envisage that policy being implemented? Would it have to...
Right. Well, I personally would not use the ones that the university use, like that fountain type one with the dual nozzles, and one doesn't work when someone else uses it. I would try the old school method, the one that we all know and love in primary school, the big trough with like 10 nozzles. I think that's pretty easy to accomplish.
You'd potentially have to enter into negotiations with the university and with their contracts with Sydney Water, seeing as they seem to own, like the university seems to operate the majority of the bubblers. Are you prepared to do that to make
I
this
see.
policy?
I guess if the process wasn't that harrowing, definitely. But if it turned out the university was like majorly against that and like wouldn't budge 100%, I don't think there's much I could do by myself. Maybe if I had the whole board on board with me, on board.
One of your policies is a 24-hour safe space.
Yes.
Let's ask, who is the safe space for, and how would it be accessed?
So it would be a non-autonomous place. I came up with, I thought of the idea because we have a lot of autonomous places, but I wanted a safe space where any student who was feeling unsafe or had troubles at home could access, because I knew of a lot of friends personally who, if things aren't going that well at home, sleep in the class law learning hubs and stuff, and I wanted to kind of create an area that was safer for them. So it would be an area that was non-autonomous. It was for anyone who was feeling unsafe or who didn't have shelter for that night. It would have hotlines to maybe a suicide hotline or like the domestic violence hotline, things like that. And that's what I envision. And maybe just like basic necessities like bean bags or like a microwave stuff, hot water, things like that.
Great. I think that's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you guys so much.
No one really knows how the game is played, the art of the trade, how the sausage gets made. We just assume that it happens, but no one else is in the room where it happens.